Hello, everyone. Hello, I hope. Those on YouTube. So we're continuing our theme, Radical Reality, with the subtitle Shocking Buddhist Ideas. And we've been hearing quite a range of different ideas of this kind of shocking nature. We had the world is alive, suffering isn't so bad, feelings aren't everything, freedom is a myth, shame is great. And last week we heard three short talks, three of our Sangha members talking about their particular radical Buddhist idea that's changed their life. And so tonight we've got a new one, unsurprisingly. And for this one, we're going to start in rural Japan, sometime around 1800 or so. And imagine you're in a kind of a forest, a Japanese forest, whatever that might look like. I don't know. I've not been to Japan, but on a hillside, before the days of cars and technology and phones. So it's very quiet, very still. That is the world. That is your world. You know, there's no whisking off to some other place. It's like another world. It would be for us. There's no one around. There's birds. There's cicadas, other strange animals. But there's a hut. There's a simple hut. And there lives a monk, a Zen Buddhist monk called Ryokan. So this is a true story. He did live around this time, and he's perhaps at this point lived there for many years. I think he spent about 20 or so, maybe even more years living alone in isolation, dwelling very happily in solitude. And during this time, he wrote many, many poems, which have become some of the most celebrated poems in Japan, actually. And this is one of his poems. It goes like this. My hut lies in the middle of a dense forest. Every year the green ivy grows longer. No news of the affairs of men, only the occasional song of a woodcutter. The sun shines and I mend my robe. When the moon comes out, I read Buddhist poems. I have nothing to report, my friends. If you want to find the meaning, stop chasing after so many things. So today's talk is entitled Less is More and More is Less. But I think alternatively it could have been called, if you want to find the meaning, stop chasing after so many things. In some ways I might have preferred that one, but this is what we've got. And this is a book of his poems, which I'd highly recommend. Sky Above, Great Wind, it's called. I think he has other books as well, but some of them might be out of print. I'd really recommend it. Beautiful poetry, particularly if you're on retreat. So this is a talk really about stillness, simplicity, and contentment, the third precept, the third ethical precept. And we might say this is something of a kind of the shadow precept. Padmavajra has said that, our president, who you'll get to meet soon, he said renunciation, he thinks, is the shadow of Western Buddhism. The shadow of Western Buddhism. It's like this thing we don't really want to look at. Like contentment, stillness, simplicity. We just don't quite want to go there. We want to carry on just as we are with the things we have and kind of ignore the tradition and ignore just how radical the Buddha's life and how his followers down the age, the kind of radical simplicity that they practiced. We had a retreat here for young people early this summer, and Ari Dasa gave this brilliant talk, and he spoke about contentment, this precept, and kind of made this point that with the other precepts, it's kind of obvious that they're unethical when we break them. You know, it's kind of, if you're unkind, or if you steal something, you hit someone across the face, or whatever your fancy, unethical fancy. It's kind of more obvious. Even like getting really drunk, or at least taking drugs, is kind of in society sort of deemed not the best. But particularly the other precepts, it's kind of supported that they're unethical. But do we really believe and feel that feeding discontent, feeding busyness, feeding anxiety, keeping ourselves distracted, do we really believe that that's harmful, that's causing harm to ourselves and other people and to the world? It's not quite as obvious, is it? We kind of we're sort of encouraged almost to kind of live like that, it seems, by kind of the modern world. When I'm feeling busy, like overly busy or feeling anxious and not really doing much about it, I tend not to see that as being kind of on par with other forms of harmful activity. But I think it's really important to look quite honestly and deeply at this. Even, kind of intellectually, we may agree that simplicity and contentment is a good thing. We may not think it's particularly shocking, but emotionally, if we really asked our gut, if our gut had a voice, or our kind of heart, our emotions had a voice, and we really said, what do you think about this? Living more simply, more kind of having less stuff, less distraction, whatever, we'd probably get a response of like, you can't be serious. What are you talking about? That's terrifying. What would happen? Nothing would get done. How would we live? It goes against the grain of our modern lives, and this makes it difficult to practice, but I think it also makes the potential for transformation immense, both for ourselves, our community, and the world at large. It's something I think the world is desperately starved of. It's kind of starving for contentment in the simple life. If you want to find the meaning, stop chasing after so many things. So perhaps the greatest champion of radical simplicity and the benefits of that is the Buddha himself. So I'm going to say a little bit about the Buddha's going forth. We call it the going forth. It's kind of it's the moment in his life. Many of us will have heard about this, but there's this moment in his early life where he kind of gives up everything and goes off and wanders as a homeless wanderer in search of truth. So the Buddha was born into wealth and status. He had everything that his society and his world told him that would bring him happiness, fulfillment, and meaning. He had food, he had shelter, comfort, the basics were covered. But he also had things like entertainment, he had dancing girls, parties, beautiful lotus ponds. He also had power and agency. He was a son, his father was something of a king, or kind of had similar king-like status. So, and that was his kind of, he was an heir to that, he was going to inherit that. So he had this kind of power and agency. He could ask for whatever he wanted. But there was less kind of gross things that he had. It wasn't all just like kind of fancy high privilege and riches. He had a caring father and foster mother, a wife and child, a prestigious career, meaningful work in a position where he could actually really benefit a lot of people if he chose to. He had all these things, and they were all good things. He had them all, and yet it wasn't enough. Life wasn't working. Still, he was deeply troubled and suffering. He was suffering. Like there's this like deep itch that was just getting stronger and stronger, or this kind of gaping hole that just wasn't being filled. He was not free, we might say. He wasn't truly free. And this is deeply painful. Inner freedom, it's not a luxury item. It's what we all deeply long for, whether we know it or not. It's not just something that those of us that have the kind of luxury of having our basic needs met need concern ourselves with. I think all of us deep down are really looking for true happiness and inner freedom of heart and mind. So the Buddha said, household life is confining, a dusty path. The life gone forth is like the open air. It is not easy living at home to practice the holy life, totally perfect, totally pure, like a polished shell. What if I were to shave off my hair and beard, put on the ochre robes, and go forth from the household life into homelessness? This is what he said when he was telling his story to some of his followers many years later on. And he did. He went forth. He gave up everything, and in time that allowed him to become the richest man alive. The inner riches of waking up to the way things really are. So he discovered that happiness comes from inside, as we say on the introductory course. The real source of happiness is inner happiness. So what does this mean to us? It's tempting to think this might not mean anything to us, because you think, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give up everything and be a homeless wanderer. And rightly so, it probably wouldn't work out well for us if we did that, partly because in the Buddhist days, society actually supported that. It was very much a kind of a thing that you could do. Homes would give food to those that were homeless and wandering. The climate meant you could sleep outdoors and such like. You may also think it doesn't apply to you because you're not a rich prince. Or maybe you are. We kind of are, aren't we, really, I suppose, if you think about it, kind of comparatively to how a lot of people live in the world. We sort of are kind of born into similar sort of prestige, you might say, and kind of comforts. But although it's unlikely many of us would benefit from that kind of level of giving up everything, the significance of his renunciation and the principle underneath that, the principle of simplicity, is true for all of us, and is just as true as ever, perhaps even more important than it was then. So this principle of less actually being more, it applies to all of us. So now I'm going to spend a bit of time exploring what this might look like and give some examples of ways of less being more. Because just to say, it's probably obvious, but some things we don't want less of. It's not saying less of anything, everything is good. So things like kindness, for example, the more the merrier. Why would you want less of that? So it's not saying it's about everything, but there are certainly, there are many things that, although they're not necessarily bad in themselves, we turn them into something painful. And I'll show you, actually. I've got some on my flip chart. These are some examples. So we've got less stuff, less stimulation, and less doing. And I'll go into those one at a time. But just to say, the real underlying thing that kind of in a sense all of Buddhism, from a certain perspective, although kind of negatively phrased, you might say, really what we're trying to have less of is what we call neurotic craving. Sometimes it's just called craving, but I think I personally find it really helpful to remember that it's neurotic craving. So this is, you may remember this again from the intro course, we talk a bit about this. It's craving for things that can't actually satisfy the underlying need or desire. Yeah, craving for things that cannot satisfy the underlying need or desire. That's neurotic craving. So when there's that kind of, that hankering, that itch, that irritation, that kind of, I just really want that thing. And we know from experience, we get the thing, it might feel good for a bit, and then the itch is still there. We still, because the underlying need is much deeper than just having stuff. The underlying need is much deeper. We often don't we don't realize that, I think. I certainly feel that most of the time it's kind of, we kind of can just skim the surface and just be living out our kind of neurotic cravings without realizing that what we're really looking for is, this kind of inner freedom and happiness that the Buddha discovered. So, but in practice, I think many of us would benefit with less of some things like these examples. A bodhisattva could have infinitely many things and stuff, ownership, stimulation, could do all sorts and not be kind of contaminated by it. The bodhisattva being a being who is sort of so kind of developed in their consciousness that they kind of become this kind of irreversible, like a mountain of you might say, of contentment and equanimity. But we need to practice ethics. We need to be aware of how we live and how we behave and what we do with our time, with our minds. How we live our lives, and that's inextricably linked with our minds, our contentment, and what we're doing. They all interrelate with each other. So if we want to become more content, we need to look at how we're living our lives. It's not enough just to kind of try and be more content and then carry on living how we normally live. So firstly, less stuff. For some reason, I wanted to call it less stuff. I don't think it's like the word stuff. Could have been less possessions or less things or less owning, less having. But yeah, less stuff. So having things, owning things, is creating conditions for anxiety. This is one way of looking at, anyway, the sort of the freedom we might experience from owning less. It's like when we own things, it's like we kind of try and make it a part of ourselves. We kind of incorporate it into sort of our ego identity. And then the more stuff we have, the more we have to protect, the more of ourselves there is to feel anxious about and be afraid of losing. That's one of the effects that kind of having a lot or owning a lot or trying to kind of hoard a lot can have. But there's also the pain of getting what we don't want and not getting what we do want. So it's kind of the kind of hankering after stuff and then getting it and it's not what we wanted, or we really want that thing and we never get it. I've been on a bit of a mission recently. I've been getting a bit kind of embarrassingly obsessed about warm jackets and wanting to be really warm. It might be something about the kind of all this talk of cost of living crisis and just winter, and I'm going on a solitary retreat soon. But yeah, I really wanted to be warm, and I was kind of, this winter, I'm going to be warm, I'm going to get a proper jacket. So I got my parents, I asked my parents if I could have an early Christmas present of a nice warm jacket. I looked it up online, they said, yeah, that looks great. Comes in the post, and I try it on, and it's not quite as warm actually as I thought it was going to be. And it's a little bit baggy. It's not quite hugging me as kind of tight and lovingly as I was kind of hoping it would. Yeah, so that saga continues. I have actually ordered a body warmer to go underneath it, which is going to arrive in the next couple of days. So if the package arrives for me, you can ring the doorbell. Yeah, but gosh, it's been painful. It's such a simple thing, but what I realized was like I just really wanted to feel safe and warm and secure. That was the kind of underlying need, and that cannot be met by a jacket, sadly. I can be warm, but I can't be perfectly safe and kind of held by a jacket. Yeah. But also in the stuff category or possessions, we've got money. Again, not that not having less money is a good thing. I think money has the great potential to do a lot of good. Yeah, if we use it wisely and if we use it for the good. But does money really give security, real security? Some money, definitely. We need some money to have basic security. But it's another thing we can kind of take more, like put more in that it can actually give. And like with money and with possessions generally, it's kind of, as I said, it's like having stuff isn't a bad thing. The more we have to give, and to share. If we do give and share, that's just to say. Yeah, it's not like having wealth. It's not something to feel guilty about. I think we do have, there seems to be this thing we have, like, I don't know if I've heard called Western guilt or something, that we sort of, just by being born into positive material conditions, that somehow we should feel bad about that. But actually, I think that's not going to do anyone any good. Feeling gratitude for what we do have, that's where abundance comes from. That's where the desire to give comes from. Not out of guilt, but out of a spirit of abundance, of wanting to share. So being content with what you have. Ryokan, in his poem, says, "The sun shines and I mend my robe." One of his other books of poems is called One Bowl, One Robe, or One Robe, One Bowl. Can't remember which way around, but he said that was like his only possessions. You think the house might have been given to him, perhaps, but yeah, mending his robe, caring for what he does have, being grateful for what you do have, not just going to buy a new one. Yeah. So I'm gonna write some. With each of these, I'm going to write some what I think you may experience more of if you have less of the thing. So less stuff. I'm going to write here more abundance. So we think abundance is often about having lots of stuff, but I'd argue that the less we have, the more generous we are, the more grateful we are, the more abundant we actually are, the more abundant we'll feel, the inner abundance. More appreciation, more gratitude, more abundance. Okay, moving on. Less stimulation. So this is the whole area of distraction and kind of like numbing ourselves with excess sense pleasure. All techniques, I would argue, of kind of avoiding ourselves, avoiding really being with ourselves, and it just leads to kind of skimming along the surface of life. It's like life's this almighty great ocean, and we're just skimming along the surface, just looking for the nice, pretty things all the time, but not really sinking deeper into the riches of life and ourselves. And I think many of us, I probably don't even realize to the extent this is the case, but we're addicted to distraction a lot of the time. Often we think about addiction maybe as being bigger things, but the big addictions, but probably many of us are kind of addicted to distraction, and we're kind of expert at justifying it. Phones, computers, social media, the kind of the phenomena of sit down, phone out sort of business. I had quite a sort of thoroughly worked into video gaming career in my early life, and earlier in the year I had a bit of a jaunt back into that world. I kind of thought, I feel like this sort of a bit of my childhood I've kind of left behind here, and had a bit of explore with it. And it was great fun. Had some great nights staying up late, going on adventures in some mythical world. But at the end, each time it was like, that was really fun. And now I just feel quite numb and empty, and it was fun, but then what? Then what? I'm just left feeling kind of, like everything else just feels a bit more numb, and I don't quite want to do other things, and things that matter to me seem to matter less, like friendship and beauty in nature. The news can be another big one for people. I actually have a bit of an aspiration to look at the news more. I can tend the other way. I kind of just want to avoid all that. But I do hear a lot of people, it's kind of, that can be an issue, being kind of addicted to the news, wanting to be plugged in all the time and kind of into the sort of drama and soap opera of life. Ryokan says, "No news of the affair of men, only the occasional song of a woodcutter." Again, news is not bad, but we just, each of us, we just see kind of examples of ways we can sometimes go a bit too far. Food and sex, another big one, could give a whole talk on that, but I'm not going to go into that now. But an alternative to kind of feeding stimulation and distraction is to be courageously mindful, to actually feel what we're feeling and not just numb it out, not just kind of look for more stimulation. Taking opportunities to stop feeding that wheel, like this wheel of distraction that's kind of sucking the world dry of its life and soul. That said, pleasure is really important. So really important to say this. This is not saying kind of replace, your enjoyments with just like being kind of blocked and empty and not doing anything interesting. It's so easy to think when we start talking about overcoming craving, living a simple life, that we kind of paint this grey picture where not much is happening. We're kind of away from all that kind of sticky craving stuff, but then we're sort of, maybe it's like we feel quite safe because of that, but we're not really relishing life. We're not really enjoying it necessarily in that kind of vision. But it's neurotic craving that's the cause of suffering, not desire and pleasure. In fact, the Buddha declared that the enjoyment of wholesome pleasures, is the middle way. It is the way that leads to enlightenment. It's not just that a bit of pleasure is all right. It's kind of actually we're beings of pleasure and desire, learning to find more and more wholesome kind of ways of experiencing that is the way that leads to enlightenment. It's not an optional thing. So on this, so one thing we can do is look out for ways of choosing more beautiful forms of pleasure. Ryokan says, "When the moon comes out, I read Buddhist poems." So you have the moon, in this magical, mythical Japanese forest, and reading poems. Very simple. There are many other things we can do. We can eat mindfully, eating, enjoying the food not doing something else at the same time, taking time to stop and appreciate nature. Reading a good book and taking our time with it, relishing it. Listening to music whilst not doing something else. Friendship, that's a big one. meditation. Be really enjoying the simplicity of the sensations of breathing, for example. And then all kinds of forms of creativity, writing, painting, playing music. I'm sure you can think of more and more examples, but ways we can there are these ways we can slowly just encourage ourselves to kind of treat ourselves to more wholesome forms of pleasure. Something Sangha said somewhere was, often we talk about, I want to treat myself tonight. And that usually means kind of chocolate and a box set or something, which, fair enough. I do enjoy a bit of that every now and then. But he's saying well, why not really, really treat yourself to something that's really wholesome, that's going to make you feel really nourished and happy and satisfied, something really skillful pleasure. That's a real treat. That's the real treat. So less stimulation. I'm going to put here, and there's many things I could have written here, but this is what I would like. More beauty. So more beautiful forms of enjoyment. I kind of think sometimes that it might be helpful if we sort of rebranded the third precept of rather than simplicity, it was beauty, So rather than the simple life, imagine the beautiful life. Oh. Yeah. So next, less doing. So really here, what I'm saying is less busyness. Very difficult. A lot of us, we have a lot of responsibility, a lot of things we need to do. But the real busyness, you might say, is more of an inequality. But for most of us, we practice this by actually being less busy, by doing less. And again, our culture seems to really champion this, rushing and filling all our time, always using our time really well. I've got to use my time really well. It's the more we can do, somehow the more we're living, the more we're winning at life if we're just doing loads and loads and loads of good stuff. So we might practice filling our diary less, even turning it around, doing nothing in our diary. This is something that Ratnaguna recommends, an Alderman who wrote this book on reflection, the art of reflection, programming in time to do nothing. This is really difficult. It's a challenge. You may encounter what I call to myself, at least, the intense existential situation of free time. You may encounter the dragon of boredom. Another Alderman of Vasantra speaks about boredom as being a dragon guarding treasure. A dragon guarding treasure. If you can stay with it long enough, if you can stay with the dragon, you may find he won't eat you, he won't burn you, he'll reveal the treasure. What that treasure is, you have to discover for yourself. But it's there, I can promise you. But taking time to actually do nothing. And by nothing, I don't really know exactly how to define that, but it is nothing. It's not it's not literally nothing, but it's sort of, sitting in a chair, looking at the view, whatever it might be, particularly being in nature, rather than just staring at a blank wall, which might make us have other adverse side effects. Being somewhere beautiful like nature, taking time just to be, not doing anything, just being. Ryokan says, "My hut lies in the middle of a dense forest. Every year the green ivy grows longer." So that's definitely somebody who's not in any rush, watching the ivy grow longer. And we might be able to get a taste of this by going on retreat. It's really, really a good way to try and to experience something of this quality, the richness that comes out when there's less doing, less stimulation. We may find some of that treasure. So if you can, really advise getting on a retreat. Pamavajra this Saturday might be a good start, or not just a good start, just a good thing to do. So, less doing. What am I going to put here? I'm going to put more living. We often think that, living, to live means to just be doing lots of stuff, but I'd argue that, at least to some extent, training ourselves to perhaps do just a bit less, to have more time just to be, we may actually experience that we're living even more. That we most certainly will, I would imagine. But wait, there's one more that I'm going to add to this list, and this feels a bit risky, and I may get kicked out of the Buddhist Centre for writing this. So, yeah, thanks for having me, if that's the case. And you've been very kind over these last few months. But what I'm going to write, I'm going to explain this, but I'm going to write it, because I think there's a point here. I'm going to write, less progress. Gasp. Blasphemy, isn't Buddhism all about progress, growth, progress? This is how we often talk. We say in the Metta-bhavana, may I progress, may they progress. So am I advocating that we don't change, that we just kind of accept ourselves as we are, and that's it, we're the finished product, get on with it? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I do want to make an important point that I think touches on a key principle of contentment and something of a paradox of life, of spiritual life and life. And this is something I'm trying to make sense of right now in real time, and probably will for the rest of my life. But it seems that, so to be content, we need to be content with ourselves. And this is actually the soil from which we grow and change. So contentment is dynamic and creative and fuels growth and flourishing. And it's kind of at its heart is contentment with ourselves. So growth arises in dependence upon conditions. This is a kind of Buddhist teaching. Everything arises in dependence upon conditions. So like a plant, to grow, it needs good soil, fertilizer, water, sunlight. And we use our will, our energy, our willpower, skillfully to provide these conditions so that growth and progress happen in their own mysterious way. We don't force the plant to grow, we just give it what it needs. What we need is skillful states of mind and skillful action. Contentment being one of the core values there. Yeah. And I said, all neurotic craving in its essence is I would say it's like an attempt to escape ourselves because of this deep down feeling that we've got this kind of gaping hole inside of us, this kind of inner emptiness, this emotional emptiness. So we chase possessions, we chase distraction, stimulation, we try and do loads of stuff, all to try and fill this inner emptiness and to become whole, believing we can become whole. I think I really did think I'd be more whole after that jacket, but no. Yeah, and I think kind of a particular seductive form of kind of neurotic craving is again quite acceptable in our culture, is kind of chasing after progress, like this kind of constant chasing, this constant needing more. I'm going to actually add here, just so might help me reduce the chance of me getting kicked out of the Buddhist Centre. Less chasing progress. That's probably a bit more accurate. Yeah, our society feeds on this kind of insatiable myth of progress, it seems, more technology, getting on the property ladder, getting more money, progress in work and progress in career, economic growth. It's always just we need more, kind of things aren't good now, but they'll be better in the future if we just keep progressing. Even improving ourselves, there's this explosion in the modern world of self-help books, many of which I've really benefited from, including some on Buddhism. But there can be this narrative of there's this better you waiting in the future, then you'll really be living. But right now, no, it's in the future, it's all there. You just got to keep progressing, you'll get there eventually. Yeah, and it'd be kind of become this kind of craving and demanding and grasping after a better self. Which you might say is a kind of near enemy of a healthy desire to grow and change. And yeah, my experience is it's not always easy to tell apart kind of chasing progress from a healthy desire for change and growth. I find that really slippery fish. I think a kind of healthy desire for growth is more joyful, grateful, loving, and spontaneous, and less about I'm not good enough, I need to get better, I need to be that thing, or whatever it is, or I need to take this step, make this progress, make everything better. It's not, it kind of escapes our present experience and our awareness. And like for myself, it's like part of me still hasn't caught up with the fact that life isn't a computer game where I'm just keep trying to level up all the time. And like if I just keep leveling up, I'll get all these achievements and then everything will be great. It's not like that. So what's an alternative here? Well, in his book, Living with Kindness, by Sangha Night, which is an amazing book, probably in most of my talks, I usually mention this and say, get this book, it's amazing. But he has some great stuff to say on contentment, actually. He says, feeling metta for oneself is the keystone of contentment. Feeling metta for oneself is the keystone of contentment. Contentment and self-metta are two sides of the same coin. Being able to be this full, positive, kind of loving, metaphor relationship with ourself, that is the kind of keystone of contentment. We might say kind of awareness is also part of this. If you keep meditating, practicing doing mindfulness and breathing, metta bhavana, you might start to feel that there's sort of kind of two sides of the one kind of skillful state of consciousness that the Buddha is quite naturally and spontaneously. But awareness and metta are very interrelated. So learning to be with ourselves, to be with our experience, and to meet that with kindness, kindly awareness, metta. Perhaps this is, one of the keys to contentment. If we want to be able to be, to not have distraction, to not need all these things, we need to be able to be with ourselves and to be able to enjoy our own, enjoy ourselves, enjoy our own being in a very simple way, a very profound way. So less chasing progress. More love and meaning. We often think, meaning comes from progress, chasing progress. That's like our purpose. Like I've got this purpose and I need to fulfill it. But my experience is that meaning is a bit more intangible than that. It's a bit more subtle. It's not about a kind of concrete, well thought out purpose. Something else, something a bit more subtle. Again, Ryokan, I have nothing to report, my friends. If you want to find the meaning, stop chasing after so many things. So all of these, again, they're not kind of there to guilt trip us, to make us think, I need to give up all these things. They're an invitation to live a more beautiful life. That's what this is really about. Invitation to live a more beautiful life, and a life that's far more satisfying and richer. Sangha Night says in Living with Kindness, contentment is found in what you are and what you have, not in what you could be and what you might have. But to finish, I just want to say something about how this, like the kind of bigger picture here, because I've been saying quite a bit about sort of ourselves, our personal life, our own kind of satisfaction, happiness, and the kind of the benefits for ourselves of living a simpler life. But it's more than that. It's far more than that. We might say all of kind of what we would call world problems have at their heart this kind of insatiable need for more, always needing more. Neurotic craving, you might say, this is the heart of it. That's what's really driving all these kind of what we might call world problems. The environmental kind of issues in the world being one of those. And the only real solution, the only ultimate solution is a spiritual one, because to not always want more requires a spiritual turnaround. It requires a revolution in consciousness. It's not just something that we can solve with good policy and good intentions. It requires a revolution in consciousness, because that kind of insatiable need for more, comes from the mind of individuals. And as long as people think having and consuming less equals being poorer, then they won't opt for it. It has to be beautiful. We have to really believe ourselves and to show to others that less really can be more. Like It's not that less is less and that's a good thing. It's less is more. It is actually better. It does give all this richness and all this beauty and meaning and connection. What everyone is secretly looking for, whether they know it or not, I would argue. We can't force this on others. People have to discover it for themselves. They have to really want it for themselves. So we can champion this. We can champion a life where less really is more. So I'll finish with Ryokan's poem one last time. My hut lies in the middle of a dense forest. Every year the green ivy grows longer. No news of the affairs of men, only the occasional song of a woodcutter. The sun shines and I mend my robe. When the moon comes out, I read Buddhist poems. I have nothing to report, my friends. If you want to find the meaning, stop chasing after so many things. Thank you.